Hello, friends, and hello to the Jewish diaspora, and welcome to the latest instalment of Sunday Cinematic Service. I'm Chris, and I'm joined by Marcus and Heath as we continue our deep dive into the world of religious cinema. Thus far, this series has certainly assessed some truly great films that I was sadly not around to take part in. For you see, like Moses, wandering in the inhospitable desert for 40 years, my Sunday Cinematic Service experience thus far has been akin to a barren wasteland filled with indulgent Mel Gibson torture porn, a gloriously lame but ultimately terrible Christian superhero TV series, and the tale of a simple man fighting against logic and reason in the name of Christ and his daughter. The fellows have kindly granted that I pick this week's film. I have found my oasis in the desert, and it is very real. So today we begin to explore the matter of animated religious films. Now, I can feel the shudder running down your spine, dear listener, but be assured there are some absolute gems worth exploring, and plenty of bad for your continued amusement. Anyway, we begin with what many consider to be a true classic, DreamWorks' The Prince of Egypt. Based on the Book of Exodus, Prince of Egypt manages to single itself out from other adaptations of the misadventures of Moses by repositioning the central core of the story to that of a relationship between our erstwhile hero and his brother Ramesses. Released in 1998 to general acclaim and moderate box office success, the film has gained a substantial reputation as an underrated gem. Produced at a time when ripping off the success of the Disney Renaissance was the in thing, Prince of Egypt succeeds in recontextualizing the often inhuman and distant tales of the Bible by adding in relatable protagonists, gorgeous animation, a stellar voice cast, a morally ambiguous portrayal of God, and yes, songs. The film was produced by DreamWorks co-founder Jeffrey Katzenberg, former head of Disney, and while his vindictiveness for his former company has never felt quite as strongly as in his other animated darling, the meme-ready Shrek, it is clear where this film takes its inspiration from. And I'm okay with this, because the film is so masterfully presented that I'm willing to forgive its more derivative aspects. And at least they didn't include an annoying talking animal sidekick to run around with Moses and spout pop culture references. But anyway, I've given a fairly positive introduction to the film. You can probably gather I largely really enjoy it, but I'm going to open up the floor to my colleagues. Marcus, Heath, what did you think of the film?
So yeah, I think this film sort of shows one of the sort of themes that we've had so far from the show. That, you know, as the premier left-wing sort of religious podcast, we refuse to criticize Islam. Like, we're watching this film as a portrayal of Moses as animated form. Would we be watching a film of an animated Muhammad? No.
All right, come on. Stop being
anyway,
silly.
About the film in serious terms. Yeah, I thought that the animation, as you say, is absolutely amazing. This is one of the best looking animated films I think probably ever made. Like, there are some shots in this that are just jaw dropping. Oh god, this is going to really show my Exodus ignorance now. So the bit where he where the river seems to part,
the Red Sea,
the Red Sea,
The parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah,
the most famous biblical
parting
events of all time.
the parting of the Red Sea, amazing visually, and there are just so many great shots in this that just look like you just think how can this 20-year-old film look better than almost anything sort of made sort of now. Like, you look at DreamWorks output now, you compare this visually next to something like... Is it How to Train Your Dragon's DreamWorks, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yeah, so compared to that, it looks amazing. The rest of the film that's not the visual bits, I think is kind of fine. I think it doesn't capture me as much as it does visually in sort of the storytelling or the voice acting. I think there's a lot of stuff that's kind of interesting on a sort of theoretical level, or like, you know, it's good. It's interesting to sort of debate it and sort of where animated sort of films have gone afterwards. Like, one of the things I was thinking, and possibly something we could go like into like when we're getting into it further, is that like, it made me think, like, could you get away with now doing like a really serious kind of somber adaptation of the Bible itself? Like, I think people criticize now like popular films for being adaptations of things. Like, you constantly hear now that, like, or, you know, films nowadays they're just adaptations of other things. And like, I think that one of the things that people have is that they're animating sort of low culture, superhero films, comic books, stuff like that. Well, this again is an adaptation, but it's done so seriously and somberly and so like hewing to the source material. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about there, like the behind the scenes stuff. Film itself, I think, kind of emotionally emote, just looks good. Anyway, I'll pass it to Heath.
Yeah, well, I would agree with a lot of what you were saying in regards to how it looks. For me, yeah, it wasn't. I couldn't really get into it, to be perfectly honest. I don't know whether it's just because like I'm more aware of the actual story of Exodus, and it sort of seems to, sort of gloss over a lot of the story. And I do realize, like what you were saying, Chris, that it sort of is taking it back to that central relationship between Moses and Ramesses. But I even then, that's even sort of like glossed over. It's I don't. It didn't emotionally capture me at all. This film. I'm sorry.
It's so fine. I understand. It's fine. Everyone's got different opinions, and it's fine. See, for me, I mean, I pretty much agree with you. Like, what me and my partner really noticed this time around, kind of watching it again, was how closely, like, from a structure perspective, it's like The Lion King. Like Simba / Moses does something that he regrets, runs away from home, and then has to come back to face up to his crime. Like, I think from a structure standpoint, I think it's pretty basic. Don't get me wrong, I don't think this film is like a masterpiece or anything. It's one that I'm kind of very fond of, and I'm genuinely like nostalgic for, because I saw it in the cinema like when it came out. So it's maybe part of it's that. But see, for me, the thing that really works about it is that central relationship between Ramesses and Moses, because that's something that I think other adaptations, if you've seen like the Ten Commandments of Charlton Heston, for example, I feel that they kind of get away from that. I think that for me, that's kind of what holds it together. And I mean, visually, I think it's amazing. I think the songs work surprisingly quite well. I think pretty much everything else outside of the two central characters, the music and the visuals, I think I agree with what's kind of been said. I don't think they're anything like spectacular. Even if my boy Jeff Goldblum turns up as like Moses' animated brother, like even that's not really enough to save some of the kind of more stock elements. I do think some of it is quite derivative and it is quite of the time. But for me, the elements that really work. I think they work really well. But yeah, that's my ultimate takeaway. And yeah, part of it's nostalgia as well. As I said, I saw it in the cinema when I was fairly young, and probably the Book of Exodus is the part of the Bible that I liked the best. Because yeah, I was similar to Heath in that I was raised in a Methodist household, and you are taught a lot of Bible stories. Not a lot from the Old Testament. Pretty much nothing from the Old Testament except for the story of Moses, and it always kind of captured my imagination. So yeah. But yeah, I pretty much agree with the sentiments that have been shared here, to be honest.
Well, I was thinking actually, I mentioned this to Heath sort of as the film was finishing. Like, do you think this may have worked better as sort of a like 2.5 or even like 3 hour like epic? Because a lot of it seems to be it's got a lot of the beats that like the murder of the firstborn, the plagues, and a lot of it's passed over in like montage. But yeah, so what sort of really struck out to me was that you have the scene where all the children die and it's really somber, and then like the very next scene is the song where it's like he has to believe in himself to get and it seemed to be this huge like tonal shift. I'm just wondering if you think it may have worked better as a, because it is advertised as well now. You go on like the Wikipedia and it describes it as a animated musical epic. And if it had actually embraced being like a 3 hour epic, so say like it had like a good half an hour where it was Moses at the beginning enjoying being the Prince of Egypt, and showing more of the material side, like just expanding everything out more. Whether you think it would have worked better, I'm kind of on the fence a bit. I think it would have lost some of what it is, but I think it might Would have been an interestingly different version, but yeah, I'll let you talk about it for a moment.
I actually think it's the perfect length. I don't think it needs to be any longer than it kind of already is. I think the film is efficient and effective. Like, if not, it's not spectacular, but I think it effectively sets up Moses' character. I think it sets up Ramesses' character. I think the plot is pretty well laid out. I think expanding it anymore, I think you kind of get into the realm of maybe slightly outstaying its welcome a bit. I was saying to my partner, like, while we're watching it, like, I actually like how the plagues are kind of done as part of the musical montage, because you're using the form of animation, the music, and storytelling in sync. And I think that scene works really, really well, because everything kind of marries up kind of perfectly, I think. So for me, I don't know, like, I think it is just the right length. I think you see enough of Moses' decadence, as being the Prince of Egypt. I think there is enough of a catalyst for him to leave. I think that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, like, the arcade, it is on a basic level, because it has got to appeal to, a mass audience. And I think part of it is Jeffrey Katzenberg as well. I think he wanted to make a film that was going to rival, the spectacular epic of, The Lion King. He wanted to show his former company what he could do now. I'm telling Bible stories, man. That's kind of the impression I get. I think it's the perfect length, because you start taking this whole thing a bit too seriously. You get into the realms of Exodus, Gods and Kings, the Ridley Scott version. So
yeah, and I think if it was any longer, I think it would have also, like, you'd have muddied up as you said at the beginning, it's quite a simple story in a way of two brothers fighting. So I think if it was like a 3-hour epic, it would have definitely lost that kind of central emotional, the emotional weight would have been lost behind sort of trying to get through the story itself.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like, you're trying to work through kind of these kind of relatively morally complex things in a film, essentially, made for children. And, for the most part, I think it does a pretty good job, I think one of the elements that I'm kind of interested in talking about is the way that, like, they kind of do God in the film, which I think is actually quite interesting. Because, it's ultimately what I like about Prince of Egypt, speaking as someone who is an atheist, is I do think the film just tells the story like it is. Aside from a couple scenes, I don't think there's a lot of scenes kind of grandizing God. Like, God is great and you just got to believe. And it just tells the story like it is. I kind of like the emotional turmoil of, Moses, what he feels after, basically he's responsible for the death of Ramesses' firstborn child. Like, I think that scene is chilling. And the lighting's brilliant. And he's just a broken man at that point. And ultimately, I don't think... trying to all these emotions I feel about this film are quite complex, because I'm coming at it from someone who is like an atheist ultimately. I was saying to my partner, it's pretty much the only film I'd happily sit down, like, as a story based on the Bible, and happily sit down and watch it, because I think all the other elements kind of work. So I'm kind of curious, kind of, about what you guys thought, because you haven't seen it before, have you? This is like your first time, and maybe last time watching it.
Yeah, so I've never seen it before, and I kind of have a different sort of interpretation of what was happening in regards to, like, God and how he was portrayed in it.
Yeah.
Like, they kind of glossed over a lot of, like the horrible shit. Like, you were saying Exodus is, like, one of your favorite books of the Bible. I was, like, biting my tongue not to say you monster, because it is one of the worst books of the Bible.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I find it morally reprehensible. Like, don't get me wrong. But, like, I mean, like, as a kid, when you've kind of got that shield in front of you, it's kind of the one that I found the most interesting. No, don't get me wrong now. As an adult, I find the whole thing, like, morally reprehensible, and the whole concept is kind of, icky.
Yeah, like, well, one of the things from Exodus, which they do not have in the film at all, is that each time Moses went to went to the Pharaoh and said, "Pharaoh, set my people free." God hardened the Pharaoh's heart. God made him not set the people free. Like, it is in the text. Like, it's just an absolutely horrible, reprehensible story. Like, and like, fair enough. Kind of hard to visually represent on film that God is, doing away with that whole free will thing he's always on about, and just deciding to make the Pharaoh a dick. But what that then leads to, though, is getting rid of that. Is then you're just like, well, Ramesses as a character, he's just a dick. Like, and it's kind of, it's kind of bad because Ramesses, he's an alright guy. He loses a lot in this film, so I don't know. I just that sort of aspect of it, that just didn't sit well with me. But it is ostensibly a kids' film, so you really can't have too much of that in there. Like, totally aside from the fact that you're probably trying to portray God as this wonderful benevolent being, and also the complexity of that sort of thing. It might be a bit difficult to portray in a film, but yeah, I don't know, it just didn't sit well with me.
I would like to see someone take that central idea of making the story about the relationship between Moses and Ramesses and maybe doing it like in a more in an environment that would allow the full ramifications to be explored, if you know what I mean. Because like with like an animated children's film, you can only go to a certain degree in exploring the kind of moral complexity of negotiating this situation. I don't know, maybe if it was in a slightly different environment, maybe it's, like an adult drama, for example, you might get something more interesting. But I'd like to see someone try and do that, because I do think if you're going to approach the story, I do think that's a good angle to take. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think the film is interesting as well, and this is sort of something that was touched on just then. But, like, this film, like, in terms of where it stands in the sort of Christian canon of films, so this is, 20 years ago this year. This is a huge blockbuster for, like, general audiences, which is just a retelling of a Bible story. And, like, people think that the, Christian film industry is huge now because it's like its own cottage industry. But it's now so walled off from the mainstream. There's like almost no kind of mainstream films that deal with Christianity in a serious way. You'd either have like a Christian character in a side supporting role that was like played for laughs or something. There's just nothing like this getting made anymore. In many ways, it's actually kind of fallen in a way. If you compare this if you use this as like the benchmark for, mind you, I suppose this film is kind of an anomaly. There aren't many 90s films that are like this serious about religion, and as you say, it's probably just because Katzenberg was so like egomaniacal to beat Disney. He thought, well, this is the ultimate kind of, I'll make this cool again.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I can't, I always think about kind of, what's the angle? Like, why would Jeffrey Katzenberg want to spend, tens of millions of dollars on a religious animated film? And it's precisely that, because I think he knew with his time at Disney that the key part of the audience was those kind of, the right-wing Christian mothers. He saw the outcry that, happened over films like, Hunchback of Notre Dame, for example, where Christian mothers were up in arms because the film suggested that, well, maybe religion's, not that great, That's kind of the hint that, Hunchback kind of, gives. And I just wonder if Jeffrey Katzenberg thought, well, clearly there's a huge audience here, like, I'm going to try and capitalize on this by throwing back in Disney's face, what's kind of come before. I'll take the structure of the most popular film of theirs, Lion King. I'll play a Bible story, and I'll make megabooks. It's genius. But, the film did, I think, okay. And they tried doing a follow-up. They tried doing Joseph's Technicolor Dreamcoat, similar kind of style, and it basically went nowhere. And then Jeffrey Katzenberg discovered Shrek, and then, DreamWorks never went back to that, They never returned to trying to animate, biblical stories again. But I do wonder if Jeffrey Katzenberg saw this as being like his ultimate cash cow. So you got to question, because, Jeffrey, he's a very vindictive man. I don't know him personally, but, that's the impression you get.
Yeah, well, that sort of the whole Jeffrey Katzenberg Disney thing is well documented and that sort of thing. If he honestly thought that this was going to like sort of hit a home run, like, he's sorely mistaken. Like, yeah, what I was saying, this meat.
This meat.
This
I love meat.
This film doesn't have the meat on its bones that, like, even something like The Lion King, which you bring up a couple of times, you've brought up a couple of times, is there's much more sort of emotional depth to that film than there is with this. That, like, I absolutely really didn't get a lot out of this in regards to, like, why I should care about any of the characters at all. So, and I don't know whether it was because, like what we were talking about with Passion of the Christ, whether it was a case of people, the writers going, well, everyone knows this story, so we don't need to sort of, flesh out the characters or anything like that. We just go straight down the line. We set up the conflict, and away we go. And we throw in a few songs that aren't that good.
Well, no, another part of it is that, Shakespeare is objectively, he wrote better things than the Bible. Like, who wrote the Book of Exodus? Who is it?
I don't know. Well,
No,
it is.
Dude.
It's attributed to Moses, but it's not.
Well,
it was.
Yeah.
Like, at best, I think it was written about 200 years after he supposedly lived.
All right, well, we'll take it on face value. Shakespeare is a better writer than Moses. Like, there's a reason why the Shakespeare plays in Jordan are still seen as cool, and people adapt them now, and it's been adapted a lot more. It's because it's much easier to do in this kind of format, and it's a much more streamlined story as well that's easy to do here. Like, I think this film feels relatively episodic as well, and like it could do with more fleshing out, just because there's so much that goes on. Lion King, much more stripped down, even though it does have a similar it's a very similar plot, but there's less, it's more streamlined around the one thing that's happening in it.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing with The Lion King is it's obviously not weighed down by the whole issue with the religious aspect. It is literally just the story of, the rise and fall and rise of your main character. That's your narrative arc. So I'm suggesting, like with the Shakespeare aspect, I've seen loads of stuff recently which recontextualize as Shakespeare. Like, I watched an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet recently. That was genuinely interesting. I never thought I'd be interested in that play ever again.
Was that The Lion King 2?
The Lion King 2, yeah. Everyone's favourite fanfic sequel. Joking aside, so, you got to wonder how many times they can keep on adapting these tales and doing an alternative spin on it, It's, where does it end, Can it end? Do you think people will ever get tired of seeing Bible stories being adapted for the big screen?
Well, I think what you said about Romeo and Juliet was interesting, because you said it was a sort of reinterpretation of it. I feel like because people, it's going to sound stupid, but because people acknowledge that Shakespeare's fiction, there's not the kind of people feel they can reimagine it and recontextualize it in different ways, which you don't get with the, like, there'd be an outcry if you did a version of the Bible set now or something. I mean, there were like a TV show recently called Black Jesus, which was about the resurrection of Jesus, but he comes back in a black ghetto, and it's a comedy, but it met with such outcry. You'd get something like that, but Shakespeare, because people acknowledge that it's fiction and it's not seen as like the literal truth. I feel like it's not seen as precious as the Bible, so there's more interesting stuff, and people are drawn to that who wouldn't Orson Welles has tackled Shakespeare, and interesting auteurs do Shakespeare adaptations because they can try and spin it in their own way. But I feel like there just isn't that with the Bible. And again, I think it's just because the source material's not as strong as Shakespeare.
Yeah, well,
Definitely.
Yeah, I was gonna say as well, like, you're talking about like Black Jesus, but like even talking about like the Last Temptation of Christ and films like that, like that sort of still tell the story and still sort of set it in the time, but do a different interpretation. Even films like that just get completely lambasted, and yeah, I think that the idea of blasphemy and that sort of thing, like, even though there's not really any laws against it or anything like that, I think the ideas of blasphemy still sort of exist in a social sense, so we don't tend to try and reimagine or recontextualize, Bible stories. And I think it sort of will kind of lead to the death of these things, because, yeah, like, though I'm trying to think, like, after the Prince of Egypt, what was like the next sort of big...
Passion of the Christ.
Passion of the Christ, there you go, yeah. So, and then after that...
Exodus, Gods and Kings, probably.
Well, yeah, and those films, like, there were a whole wave of them. Like, what was the one you watched recently? Was it the Ben-Hur remake?
I didn't know. I haven't watched Ben-Hur remake.
Oh, well, I'm sure that... But all these films now are trying to cash in on the success of, like, micro-budget, like, true, the sort of purer versions of them. Like that one we watched last week, A Matter of Faith. And I think another reason why you don't get, like, the Shakespeare adaptations, to keep going on this, because it is quite an interesting parallel. Like, to an extent, a lot of religious films, not this one, because it is so mainstream, but they are kind of vehicles to pursue, like there isn't a powerful Shakespeare industry in America. America obviously makes the majority of, like, mainstream films. But, like, because it is so entangled into society there, and because there is, like, huge lobbying groups for it as well, it's just such a different beast to any kind of thing you could adapt. Like it is used to an extent to spread, like, again, you've mentioned right-wing views as well, like, that it's so entangled in, like, this social, political aspect as well. I think it's quite difficult to make something that's not, like... I just don't think there's as many interesting takes as you can do.
No, and to be honest, it is an interesting discussion. To be honest, as I said, even though I really enjoy aspects of the film, it is probably a more interesting discussion than probably the film itself. You know what I mean? Like, so even if we spend the rest of his time just talking about that, I'm pretty much okay with that, to be honest. Because, yeah, I mean, to be honest, we've kind of given our thoughts about the film, and we basically echoed pretty much what everyone has said. We enjoy the visuals. One of us was attached to the central kind of conflict. And for the others, found it like an unemotional experience. So I think I think what we're talking about now is more interesting than probably harping on about that, to be honest.
Well, it's more interesting than the film and more interesting than The Lion King. Like, so if we, I don't want to just have a go at Prince of Egypt on this one. I'd rather talk about this than The Lion King either. But yeah, no, I think I do think that it's like what you're talking about with the whole sort of pure flicks thing as well, is that it seems that the money to be made in films is, rather than looking at the historical persecution inherent in the Judeo-Christian religions, like, rather than looking at the historic persecution, the where the money is at now is looking at the modern day persecution that you find. And this is why you probably wouldn't, I think this is probably why you see the death of the sort of biblical epics as well. And maybe it might lead to sort of opening that up for a broader interpretations of the text and that sort of thing, because there's some, like, really interesting stories in the Bible, and I would personally love to do this exact story, but more from the perspective of the Pharaoh, rather than the perspective of Moses. Because essentially you've got someone who is has been raised with you, who is then trying to basically destroy the life that you've had and that you've had with that person. And Moses has benefited from everything that the Pharaoh has been able to give him, and then he sort of just throws it in his face. Now, yes, there's a slavery element involved, but like, it's one of the things as well in the film, like they were talking about, oh, no nation should be built on slavery. It's like, well, the Jews didn't follow that 5 minutes after they got out of fucking Egypt. Like, the Jews had slaves. Like, this is not, slavery was a normal thing in those times. Like, so that part pissed me off. But anyway, I suppose the thing that I'm just trying to say is that I think the shift in sort of biblical, well, not biblical, but religious storytelling, as I said, is the shift from historical persecution to perceived modern day persecution.
Well, I think a big reason as well that like these films are just made for like a sort of cultish kind of like the Pure Fix thing. It's not for mainstream audiences, is it? It's for hardcore Christians. And I think a reason for that is just that like in the mainstream, most people our age do find sort of Christianity, because its mainstream adherents are so reactionary and bigoted, it kind of does mirror the sort of right in general, that like it has become like extremes really shouting at like you associate sort of Christianity now, it's not family values, is it? It's being anti-abortion and homophobic, there's stuff like that. I think that the reason why it is sort of the reason is it's become so siloed off, like the people who are the most vocal adherents of it, because the majority of people who are like under 30, you might say, are atheists. They kind of will look at like Christianity itself as being kind of uncouth, and I think it's because of that it's become siloed off, and they do feel persecuted, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. The more like they portray themselves as being a persecuted minority, and the more that they push sort of a more social kind of conservatism, the more then they will become persecuted minority, because people find their views rightly quite abhorrent. I think it's just going to keep going like that. Like, there just isn't among young people a kind of, no one wants to see these films anymore, just because the kind of mainstream adherents of them are so like, well, yeah, they're like reactionary bigots, really. I know that the reason why they're portrayed like that is because it sort of serves like, corporate interests and stuff to try and portray the... Anyway, that's going to get really off topic, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. And like with the whole like, I think because Prince of Egypt was made in a, even though it was only 20 years ago, it was made just in a different time for, I think, Christianity in general. The perception was that, America and wider extent the Western world were Christian nations. Everyone knows these stories and everyone will come flocking to our film. And I think, I don't think really that was necessarily the case even back in 1998, and it's gotten less so now. And as you say, now the shift has gone from telling stories to appeal to a wide audience, i.e. a Christian audience, to validating the concerns that some Christians feel that they are being persecuted, for their beliefs. So yeah, I think that's kind of it in a nutshell, really.
But yeah, and I think, like, you think of, like, great people who made, like, religious films, like Martin Scorsese, or Paul Schrader as well. Like, we watched First Reformed recently, which is excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the sort of interesting stuff there is the schadenfreude between these people who, like, they clearly, like, have some kind of love of kind of, like, dirt and, like, of like, the seedier side of things. Like Taxi Driver, for example, it's not an overtly religious film, but, he calls himself the man of, he's the God's lonely man. And it has this sort of interesting push-pull between the main creative forces, Martin Scorsese and Paul Schrader. They're religious people who, like, are repulsed on some level, the same way Travis Bickle is, by, like, women who, like, have sex with like, people, like, casual sex. And they're, like, repulsed by prostitution and drug addiction. But they also are fascinated by that. And I also think that, like, there's just no reason to sort of be like that anymore. Like, because things are more open now, Like, there isn't that push-pull in people anymore. So I think that interesting aspect to Christian filmmaking's also died, just with social times changing as well. But yeah, I suppose that like the social changes that have happened have kind of rendered anything interesting to say within the medium kind of irrelevant. And it is just like older people who grew up with like a Catholic background that went into it that make interesting stuff anymore. But yeah, like I suppose that it's just a victim of like the changing times that it's placed within is Christian cinema. But that gets very far away from Prince of Egypt. Anyway, ostensibly as a religious-based podcast, what did you think of the portrayal of religion in Prince of Egypt? Go Heath, you've not spoken in a while.
As I said, the portrayal of the Book of Exodus. So if we're talking about the actual source material, I think it's a very like we'll use the term. It's been a running term. I think it's thin gruel.
I love that description. I would describe it as the Sunday school version of the story. You know what I mean?
I was going to pair the thin gruel with some weak sauce as well. Like, it is so, like, sort of, like, whitewashed, I suppose you could say, like, as a telling of the story. And like, yeah, there's bits in it that are pretty dark. Like, you know, the whole scene at the start where where Moses finds out that he's actually a Hebrew, and that and he finds out what the Pharaoh did to like all the Hebrew children and that sort of thing. Throwing them to the crocodiles, and then when Ramesses' son dies, that's pretty dark. But for the rest of it, it kind of just sort of glosses over everything. So, I would say other than that, there's not really a lot of sort of there's not a lot of sort of religious representation in it. Surprisingly, seeing as it is the telling of a book of the Bible. But what did you think, Chris?
Yeah, it's funny about because it is like one of the most famous and most widely known stories in the Bible. Now, I pretty much agree with your sentiments. I mean, I would also throw out the scene kind of towards the end, as I said, when Ramesses is mourning the death of his son. I think that's a pretty powerful moment, and you kind of bit like, I think for me with this film is whenever I watch it or whenever I think about it, I was thinking, oh yeah, I like that scene, I love that scene. I think they do this character interaction well. I then forget about the other scenes that are kind of in between, which are pretty like they're just scenes in a movie. I think for me, the scenes in this film that are powerful, I think do work. But yeah, aside of that, so I agree with what you said there. I think the scene where Moses discovers who he is, I think is probably the strongest scene of the whole film. Like that sequence, I think is really good. In terms of how religion is portrayed, it's a minefield, to be honest. It's such a minefield because it's part of a long, proud tradition of Western animated films, particularly from the Disney company. I'm going to go back onto Disney for a bit, of essentially whitewashing, well, even outside of Bible stories, even kind of whitewashing history. I'll say at the end of the film, I say to my partner, it's probably maybe a good job / not a good job that they kind of skip past what happened after the Hebrews were set free. Like what happens next, because some pretty weird and quite fucked up shit goes down, if memory serves.
There's 40 years in the desert, so and then there's the whole like 10 Commandments thing, and then like that was one of the things where he's bringing the 10 Commandments down. I'm like, oh, this must be the second version because there's not people like killing each other and fornicating and whatnot in the scene. So I'm like, obviously this is the second version. All right, fair enough, on board. But actually, one of the things you were saying in that, and now I've forgotten my train of thought because I went off on.
You got to talk about Sodom and or people
Yeah.
crazy. They should have put that in the Disney animated film for all ages. They should have put those scenes in there. That'd have been great. I think if they had like a little musical number, and I want Prince of Egypt too. Damn it, where things get weird.
I actually remembered what I was going to say about you. You were talking about the scene where he sort of finds out what the Pharaoh did, and that sort of thing. One of the things with that, though, that I think, and I said to Marcus while we were watching it, it's like, why didn't we start the film here? Like, why didn't we start the film with that scene and him waking up in bed and going, what the, because pretty much before that, except for like the meet cute with the girl that he ends up marrying, there's nothing else really in there that's not told through that same scene. It sort of repeats what happened right at the start.
I'm just running through all the scenes in my head at the moment.
So basically, you have the first scene where Pharaoh's going around killing the kids, and then the mother gets him, and then gets him. The queen gets him out of the river, takes him to meet Pharaoh. Then you have the pointless scene of them riding their chariots around, which could have easily been put after that scene anyway. After the scene where he finds out that the what the Pharaoh did and where he comes from and that sort of thing. I think it would have been more interesting to start with that, have him wake up from sort of like this like bad dream about what happened, and then sort of take the film from there. Like, I reckon this film could do quite well with like a bit of a re-edit.
Yeah, like a slight jig around of the scenes. And I suppose, the only important thing that happens before then, and it's only something I kind of noticed now, is they do quite... One of the things that I will defend this film about is I do think they do some quite good visual shorthand, or kind of what I call like story punctuation marks. They set up that Ramesses gives like a ring to Moses, which then he gives back to Ramesses when he returns to let his people go. And Moses wears that ring for actually quite a long time, even after he's left Egypt, as a reminder that he's left his place. But he's still got that aspect of still kind of loves his brother. Then him returning the ring, and basically I'm just rambling about just a little bit of like visual storytelling that I like. It's a nice little indicator of kind of where their relationship is at. Outside of that minute, tiny little detail, which could have been put basically, as you said, after that scene. I think that's the really only really important sequence. That Ramesses gives this ring to Moses, which is then passed between the two brothers as a sign of kind of their diminishing relationship. But yeah, besides from that, I agree with you. I think it would have been a really strong way to open the film.
Yeah, I honestly think, as the film stands, I could whack it in to my editor right now and like just cut out bits of it and put scenes in different places, and it'd work just as well as a film. But I think it would be more sort of powerful, and it would actually show initially that he's sort of having these doubts. Like he never sort of has any doubts about anything up until when he sort of meets his sister, and then he starts like, that's when he's like, obviously something's wrong. She sung a lullaby that I vaguely remember. And I think it would have worked a hell of a lot better had it just started out with him having those doubts, then gone into him, being a bit of a dick.
Well, I think that gets to a thing that I think similar to our problem with Passion of the Christ. I think Moses is a sort of uninteresting character. And I think that part of the problem is Val Kilmer is such a fucking wet blanket in this film. Like, I think that Patrick Stewart's really good. And
the poo from the Emoji film.
The poo from the Emoji film is really good. And it's Ralph Fiennes, isn't it, playing...
It's Ray Fiennes as Ramesses, yeah. I think he's good. I think he's really good, actually.
He's good, but yeah, fucking Val Kilmer, he just says every line in, like, that serious intonation that, like, this is a serious project. I'm a serious actor. And
all I could think of was his performance in Batman Forever. That's all I had in my head while I was watching the film. I kept imagining him saying all these lines, but, like, in his Batman suit. Yeah, but that's all I can get out of my head.
Let my people go.
I'll tell you why though. Why they opened it up the way they did, and I'm sorry to go back to this comparison, but again, it's something I will notice this time. I think again, once again, they were going for the Lion King-esque gut punch opening. You know, like the way the Lion King opens with the circle of life and, all the animals come in into a spectacular scene, and then it ends on the boom, it cuts to the credits, and then your film begins proper. I think they wanted to, once again, go for something similar to that. You've got this huge, massive musical number, which sets up the epicness of the grand sweep of everything, and then right at the end, you do a boom, fade to black, and then you open up with a story proper. Again, I think it was part of the whole, look at us, we're DreamWorks, we're as big as Disney. And that's my conspiracy theory on why the film opens the way it does.
Well, yeah, fair enough. It's like a sort of visually spectacular opening, but it is ultimately pointless when you just told the same story again later on. Much better through actual visual storytelling as well.
Well, do you think if it wasn't for The Lion King, this film would even be a musical? Because frankly, these songs add nothing to this film. Like, some of them are just like, as you were saying, like a verse or something. Like, there's nothing to these songs at all, I don't think. This is obviously a film.
They ultimately don't really forward.
It's not a music criticism podcast, but these songs are so bad. They just don't add anything. I suppose they're not objectively terrible. But, do you think this film would even be a musical if it weren't for The Lion King, Chris?
Nope. I don't even think this film would exist. it definitely wouldn't exist. If The Lion King hadn't been, or any of the other kind of Disney animated films like Beauty and the Beast had been a success, I don't think Prince of Egypt would exist. I don't even think, it wouldn't even cross my mind. You think about it, and what Disney were doing. It was such abstract concepts. Like, who thought, I'm going to take Victor Hugo's treatise on the architecture of Notre Dame and make it into a Disney musical. Like, that's so bizarre, that's so strange, and yet they threw millions of dollars at it. So that was just the in thing at the time, taking these kind of, these well-known stories, quite adult stories, and Disneyfying them. It is bizarre when you get right down to it. Obviously, I'm not saying it helps the film, but I'm saying from like a cold, cynical business standpoint, that's why the film opens the way it does, because they wanted that like Lion King-esque gut punch of an opening, which they don't succeed on. Sorry, I keep going back to the Lion King, but it was really, really apparent like how much the film borrows from the Lion King structure, like watching it this time. It's something I really, really noticed.
Though you did bring up like the Hunchback of Notre Dame as well, though that was sort of, it was one of the films that was seen as the end of the Disney Renaissance. So like, it wasn't received that well, and I think that potentially maybe this film maybe just came out at the wrong time. Like, it was on the sort of downward slope of the sort of, the Disney Renaissance. I know it's not a Disney film, but, it's obviously trying to ride on that wave. And then, Toy Story came out in
95.
I thought
95,
95. So, like,
well, I want to challenge this, because I was doing some research into this, and I read that this was the most successful non-Disney animated film ever when it came out, and made $200 million. I might have to research that again. I'm telling you, I read that it was the most successful non-Disney animated film up until Rugrats.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
So I don't think it was like, negatively, commercially, I don't think it was like badly done or anything. I think it did well. Yeah. I mean, 200 million. It doesn't sound like that much now, but I suppose it probably was top 10 of the year.
Yeah. Well, like, I suppose the other thing that you need to look at is if you look at things like Hercules, which was considered a flop, it made $180 million.
Okay.
Like, $200 million to Disney is not a lot. And this is where things were sort of dropping off with Disney. I think the end of the whole, Disney, Renaissance, and it was Treasure Planet, which just
God, yeah.
I think it actually lost them like butt tons of money.
Yeah, I'm sure
I
that
think
had
it
like
was
a
something
30
like,
million box office or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think they ultimately lost about $100 million on that film. I think the one that really turned people off to the whole concept of a Disney Renaissance was Pocahontas. I mean, that film is fucking awful in any case. Like, it's just dreadful. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it was a case that people were getting sick of this kind of format, like, you know, the Broadway musical on a classic tale. I think people were getting fed up of that. And I don't know, it's kind of weird because Prince of Egypt has had such a weird like after history where loads of people kind of view it as being as I said in my opening, a genuinely underrated nostalgic classic. For me, especially watching it this time, it kind of falls in an awkward in between. It's definitely nostalgic, but I wouldn't really call it a classic either. Like, as I said, there's elements that I like and I will defend, but I'm definitely, speaking to you guys, I'm definitely watching it again. I am like, this is so 1998, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I will go back to like you're saying that Pocahontas was like the downturn. I'm wondering now whether Mel Gibson was right, because he's in that.
He is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, like, yeah, this 200 million budget box office for this. Shrek 1, which, was that the next DreamWorks film, or did they do something in between Prince of Egypt and Shrek?
I think they did. They did, I don't know if you remember it, they did Sinbad, which is a similar art style to Prince of Egypt.
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, I don't either.
No, nobody remembers it except for animation historian geeks like me. After they did that, they did Sinbad, which was an attempt to doing like a role-licking Aladdin-esque film. That didn't do very well. And then Jeffrey Katzenberg fueled all of his malice, his anger, and his hatred for all life into Shrek. That's where Shrek came from.
Yeah, well, there is a
Lord of the Rings
definite format now to DreamWorks films, which is, it's like a modern retelling of Summer, but with like just pop culture references. Like if Prince of Egypt were right now, it'd be like Moses would be played by I don't know, Chris Rock or something, and it would be much more comical. Like, I mean, to be fair, Val Kilmer, you know, like at least Chris Rock may have some personality, like if he played Moses.
I think the sheep that went into the cave where he found the burning bush, that would be played by Chris Rock. Your Moses would be played by like Will Ferrell or something like that.
Oh yeah. It'd be Will Ferrell with like a really broad like accent, like, "Come here, sheep. Come and look at this burning bush. And I'm not talking about Fiona." And yeah, awkward sexual references as well.
Which, to the film's credit, to Prince of Egypt's credit, for an animated children's musical, I do think it takes itself seriously, which I think is to its benefit and to its detriment as well, if you know what I mean. Like, I respect the fact that it is trying to take itself seriously. Like, as I said in my introduction, there is no annoying talking animal psychic who spouts pop culture references, which I think even all the Disney films that I like, you know, they have that element in there, which I find irksome. So to its credit, at least it doesn't go down that route. And there's not a fart joke either. There's not a fart joke in Prince of Egypt. Which is going to be worth something, right?
Yeah, and you know,
Lord of the Rings.
Like, we've said that, you know, we couldn't emotionally connect to it, but I think on an abstract level, like, there is so much to discuss. Well, as you can tell by how long this has become, but, like, there's so much to discuss about it, and it's such a relic of a different era. It is kind of, like, I'd rather watch this than fucking Shark Tale, or, what else have they done that's not... Well, I'd rather watch this than any of the sequels to Shrek. I'll put it that way. At least you can think about this and be like, that's an interesting decision there, and like, oh, that's different from now. It's got a lot of kind of like intellectualized pleasure to be taken from it.
Well, like, even if you like, if we go back to what we were saying before, like, even like modern sort of, like, we've got Romeo and Juliet and Sherlock Gnomes and stuff like that at the moment. Like, it's just, it is like if it is a much higher quality than you would normally get in this sort of thing, and I think it's something that has been lost in regards to like films that we see and that sort of thing. Like you even talk about like Pixar and stuff like that. Their films are just getting worse and worse. Like I don't know whether it's just like I haven't really gone back and watched a lot of them, but at more of the recent like Pixar films and that sort of thing are just absolute dreck. Like,
well, they're all just sequels to their early work. That's why.
Like no, but I'm even like talking like Inside Out.
Oh no, Inside Out's a classic film.
Inside Out is absolute horseshit. And I will fight you. I will fight you.
If that film had any religious elements, I think we'd have to do that in a later episode, just so me and Chris could take you down on that point. But...
Oh wow! But that's the mic drop there. I think Keith right there.
That's a controversial opinion.
That's ace. That is ace, man. That's genuinely ace.
All right. I'll give you this. Like the sequels, Monsters University, crap. Finding Dory, crap. But
I've not seen Finding Dory, so you know.
Brave, even that one, original one, crap. But Inside Out, you leave that alone.
All right, we'll have to have this fight another time.
Well, we'll mine it for whatever Christian imagery is in it, and then we can put it into this podcast.
All the Christian imagery and Inside Out, yeah, it's there, man. You just need to look. Yeah, I mean, like Coco as well. Like Coco's pretty good. I liked Coco.
Oh, Coco's great. Yeah, that's kind of mid-tier Pixar, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Oh god, so I'll absolutely fucking hate it then. Like I've just stopped watching them now. Like I don't like after Inside Out, I was just like, well, they've lost it. Time to move on.
To get it broadly back to Prince of Egypt as well.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It was an interesting digression. But like again, like the songs in this, I didn't care for them, but I preferred them to like the cast covering "Shake It Off" or something like now like they seem to just be like karaoke covers of like Taylor Swift or something like that, or Katy Perry. Like
they're actual songs that are specifically written for the film, as opposed to being a popular song.
Yeah, like again, like they're not as good as obviously like the Lion King ones, which are done by Elton John. So there's a level of craft there that you're not going to get in whoever does the music for this, whoever he is.
It was Phil Collins.
Phil Collins.
I could definitely detect the Phil all over this. Definitely.
Yeah, it sounded exactly like the Tarzan soundtrack.
And the Brother Bear soundtrack as well.
No one saw Brother Bear.
No one saw Brother Bear. Everyone hates Brother Bear.
Is Brother Bear DreamWorks?
Don't be ridiculous, Chris. You're
Nobody
talking
likes
crazy.
Brother Bear. Nobody saw Brother Bear. It's got Joaquin Phoenix turning into a bear. Like, I mean, what more do you want?
How can he do voice acting?
It's
like that film is shit. It's so bad. It is so bad, you guys. You've got no idea.
It's like every Joaquin Phoenix film. No one ever sees it.
Oh, painful.
It's a career trend.
I think this film was out. I think this film had just been released in the last film anyone went to see that had Joaquin Phoenix in it.
Which one? What?
When did Gladiator come out?
2001?
2000.
Yeah.
2000 even, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So 3 years difference. Not that far.
Excuse me, have you not heard of 2007's We Own the Night?
No one has heard of this film.
No one's seen that film, Marcus. No one has.
Joaquin Phoenix doesn't even know that film, and he's in it.
Have you not seen the recent Woody Allen film Irrational Man?
No.
That's got Joaquin Phoenix playing a Woody Allen type.
No one sees Woody Allen films anymore. Nobody.
Any final thoughts on Prince of Egypt?
Joaquin Phoenix is going to be the Joker as well, I'll have you know. So, maybe people will turn up to that, but maybe they won't.
So no final thoughts on Prince of Egypt.
Sorry, yeah, I think we might just talk about the career path of Joaquin Phoenix. Right, no, Prince of Egypt. It was a really interesting rewatching it tonight because it's opened up my eyes a lot to the aspects that I find a little bit more irksome. I still like it. I would probably watch it again. I think the animation's great. I think the voice acting works. I think the elements for me that do work help to get past some of the more derivative elements, but I could understand getting like it is weighed down by a lot of stuff. I completely agree with pretty much everything that's been said. I just wish someone could just kind of take the awkward religious aspect out, and we could just have a cracking little story about two brothers being torn apart by their ideologies, like Shakespeare style. Bring up the bard again tonight. Yeah, that's ultimately my takeaway from it.
Well, yeah, I think it's definitely a film you should watch, if only like to see almost the pinnacle of like Western or American 2D animation. They threw everything that they had at the visuals of this film, and it shows, and it is a stunningly beautiful film. It's just a shame that it is let down by Val Kilmer and his lackluster acting and the story and just the lack of depth in with the characters and that sort of thing. I think let it down horribly, but it is definitely a film you could just switch on, put on mute, and just sit there and watch it, and I think you'd be just as entertained by the visuals alone. Put on like a really good album or something like that, and just sort of sit there and listen, like something dramatic, and then just listen to the album while you watch the visuals. I think it'd be brilliant.
Put on Bob Dylan's Christian Trilogy, and then put this on, and then see how that is as an experience. Might be like Wizard of Oz and
sync it up with. Yeah, I was going to say sync it up with Dark Side of the Moon and see if it goes, but alright, Bob Dylan's Christian Trilogy works, I guess.
Yeah, it's more religiously on point. But yeah, I think we all had a very similar experience, with me and Heath enjoying it slightly less than you did, Chris. It's just visually just breathtaking. At least watch it once for that. And yeah, just put it on mute because it's just a visual masterpiece with lackluster storytelling and lackluster central performance. But okay. So, next time then, what we'll do. Well, I had a good idea because you're a big fan. Who's your favourite filmmaker, Chris?
Stanley Kubrick.
Think smaller scale. The Stanley Kubrick of the 90s.
What, Eyes Wide Shut? Oh, Paul Thomas Anderson.
No. Not Paul Thomas Anderson. Another LA-based filmmaker. Someone who was more into sort of talky pictures. Kevin Smith is the answer.
Oh, he's not from LA.
Oh, no. Oh,
well, we want to do...
He's from Jersey.
All right, Jersey. A Jersey boy.
Yes.
A working class man like me or you. Just a working class multi-millionaire who owns his own comic store, just like me or you.
More like me.
I hate Kevin Smith with a burning passion.
Oh, dear.
Well, we're going to do his film Dogma.
Oh, okay. Have
you heard of Dogma?
Yeah, I've heard of Dogma. Yeah.
Because you're all joking aside, what's your actual opinion of Kevin Smith before the film?
My actual opinion of Kevin Smith, I think the man's got some writing talents, but I think Clerks is the most overrated piece of shit of all time. Like, it's just wanky. I don't think the writing's very good. I think the direction's terrible. I don't think he's very good in it. For the amount that he is in it. I hate the main characters. I hate the story. I hate the visual style. I hate pretty much everything about it. It might be my number one film that everybody else loves, but I hate. And I think his career path has just continued in that vein, out of what I've seen. Something about him just gets under my skin. I don't know why. I mean, I think he's a perfectly fine... I'm sure he's a fine individual, but Clerks just gets under my skin. But I am interested in seeing Dogma, because that does look interesting. I'm interested in seeing what he'd do with that. And I feel dirty as well that you maybe mentioned my favorite filmmaker Stanley Kubrick in pretty much the same sentence as him. I feel dirty. I feel betrayed actually.
Well, he hasn't really, has he?
No.
No, which is a bit of a shame that we can't talk about him in this. The closest one's The Shining, I suppose, which has nothing to do with religion, but yeah, supernatural elements that are different. But yeah, Kevin Smith, I echo your sentiments, apart from thinking that even though Clerks is awful, it's probably his best film.
I
Yeah.
don't think you guys have seen Yoga Hosers, so
I hear that's one of the worst films ever made.
it is horrendous. Like I recently watched it, and it is one of the worst films I have ever seen. Like,
Wow.
it sort of goes for a sort of weird, sort of surreal, type of thing, and it just fails miserably. Like, but anyway, that's beside the point. Don't see Yoga Hosers.
Don't see Yoga Hoses, but we'll watch Clerks next time. You're on the podcast.
No, Dogma.
Well, oh my god.
Not
Dogma.
Clerks.
Watching Dogma.
Yeah, we'll not watch Clerks. We'll watch
Dogma.
I almost said Yoga Hoses then.
We can watch Yoga Hosers as well.
Please no.
We may have to kill ourselves afterwards. Like,
Well, you just think, like, he made Red State, which no one saw. He made Cop Out, which everyone hated. Zack and Miri make a porno, which everyone hated. Like, he's not made a single film anyone's liked since, like... Well, Clerks 2 got some, like, nostalgic film critics who liked Clerks 1 going, oh, it's not actually that bad. 5 stars.
maybe Dogma will turn you guys around.
I hear it's the best of his films. Well, some people think that just because it has, like, broad targets that it hits. Like,
Yeah.
You've seen it before, haven't you, Heath?
Yeah. Well, I saw it in the 90s, so... I don't know. I was a much younger man then.
Were you a young, bearded, like, Bill Hicks fan going, actually, if they'd read the Bible, they'd know... What else did they believe? The Tooth Fairy?
No. Why would I be like that?
You weren't Bill Maher.
No. You said Bill Hicks to begin with.
I know, but Bill Hicks was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Bill Maher is... Oh, he was still around then.
Oh, well,
Anyway.
he was doing,
Politically incorrect.
I was going to say, cannibal, women films, but that was the 80s.
All right. Anyway, we've gone far off topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, next time you're on the podcast, Chris, we will do that. And next time we do one that you're not on, I was thinking, Heath, have you heard of the Ken Russell film, The Devils?
No.
That is a film which
I've heard of that.
You've heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
That film is quite famous because there's a film critic called Mark Kermode who thinks it's one of the best films ever made. I watched it maybe 3 years ago and thought it was one of the worst I'd ever seen, but it's sort of percolated around in my head and I'm just dying to watch it again. It's incredibly camp and just ridiculous, but we'll talk about that next time because you may not be with us next week, may you, Chris?
Maybe not. To our viewers who may be, listeners who may be confused, I actually don't live in the same area as the other two guys. Soon to be only one guy living in that area. I live in Manchester and the other two live in Leeds, so I can't be on every podcast, unfortunately. But we've got some contingency plans for that, you know. I was going to suggest, Marcus, that at some point me and you should do one about First Reformed.
Definitely, yeah. That'd be a great one.
And yeah, so, you know, obviously, you know, because of that, I can't be on every podcast, which is why I wanted for this, because, you know, the first few podcasts I was involved with, you know, there were stuff that wasn't great. So I was kind of interested in doing, you know, something where I'm like, okay, well, I like the film and I'm interested in to hear what the others have to say about it, and I'm sure it'll inspire some debate. Thus, that's where, you know, choosing Prince of Egypt came from. So we're kind of making some long-term contingency plans for that, because we are recording this remotely. So unfortunately I can't be on every single one. But yeah, we've got some ideas soon for doing different pairings and stuff, and keeping the Sunday cinematic service train rolling.
Yes, we do. And yeah, join us next week, listener, where we'll either have Ken Russell's The Devils or Kevin Smith's Yoga Hoses.